Hi, y'all. I'm Atticus, a bookseller at Literati Bookstore and the host for tonight's event. This evening, we are pleased to welcome Kasim Ali and Angie Kim to our At Home with Literati series in support of Good Intentions. For our attendees, the chat is closed, but I will be dropping the links to purchase Good Intentions throughout the event. You can also use the Q&A feature to submit questions at any time. This is a reminder that you can shop for any books in store or at literatibookstore.com for curbside pickup and shipping to your home anywhere in the United States. And now allow me to introduce tonight's author and moderator. Kasim Ali works at Penguin Random House and has previously been shortlisted for the Hatchet's Mo Sushrin Prize and longlisted for the Fourth Estate Fame Short Story Prize, and has contributed to the Good Journal. He comes from Birmingham and lives in London. Angie Kim moved as a preteen from Seoul, South Korea to the suburbs of Baltimore. She attended Stanford University. I don't know why I tripped up on that word. She attended Stanford University and Harvard Law School, where she was an editor of the Harvard Law Review, then practiced as a trial lawyer at Williams and Connolly. Her stories have won the Glamour Essay Contest and the Wabash Prize in Fiction, and appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, Salon, the Southern Review, the Asian American Literary Review. Wow, I'm tripping up on the strangest words, you guys. Literary, and Pank. Kim lives in Virginia with her husband and 3 sons. Miracle Creek is her debut novel. So now I will throw it over to you two.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Yay. Kasim, first of all, I just wanted to say how much I love this book. And I wanted to get a chance before I ask you to explain to us what the book is about and what the origins were. I wanted to ask you, I wanted to just sort of brag about it a little bit, just because it just was one of these things that I picked up and I just couldn't put down. And it just touched me in so many ways. Okay, so I love some of there are so many great reviews of it, and I picked a couple of them just because they resonated with some of the things that I was thinking about. So for example, I just love that Vogue India said that it's a love story full of hard choices and tensions, family obligations, and racial prejudices. And also they said not to be missed by fans of modern love, which I think is so right, because I was actually thinking that. I was thinking when I was reading it, like, this would make a great essay for modern love. And then I love the Times UK, the Sunday Times magazine from the UK's wonderful review of it. But it talked about how this is one of the most eagerly awaited debuts of 2022, exploring race, romance, and mental health problems with disarming candor. It is a rather clever novel about vulnerability and victimhood that subtly subverts the reader's expectations. And then finally, Publishers Weekly, which talked about how readers will root for this imperfect love until the end. And I love that, because to me, it was a love story that I just kept on reading, just to sort of go, okay, what is going to happen? And will this couple sort of survive all of the challenges that lie ahead for them? So I guess I just wanted to, first of all, congratulate you on your launch. The US launch is today. So here's to you and to Good Intentions. Yay. And then ask you just to explain to the readers who may not have had a chance to read a description of it. Just give us a short description and tell us how you came to write this, which is your debut.
God, thank you so much, Angie. I'm just going to say right now that listening to you talk about the book like this has blown my mind, because I just love Miracle Creek so much. And I remember my really good friend Shakila had mentioned the book to me, and she said, "You love Celeste Ng, you're gonna love this book." And I was like, I'm sold. And I read it in like maybe 3 days or maybe less. Maybe it was a weekend. I can't really remember, but I just was blown away by your book. And so when I reached out to you and you were like so like happy to read the book, and then you said such nice things about it, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. So thank you so much, and for doing this as well. Like, thank you. the book, Good Intentions, is about Noor, who is a young Pakistani Muslim boy living in Britain, and he meets Yasmina, who is a young Black Muslim girl at a party at university. And it's and I think you can help me here. No, you can back me up here. But it's very cute, isn't it? When they meet, they're very like sparks fly immediately, and it kind of, they start dating, they get into a relationship, they begin committing to one another. And so the core sort of conceit of the book is Noor will not introduce Yasmina to his parents or his family because he believes that they are anti-Black. So they won't accept her. And that is essentially the fundamental problem in their relationship. And it kind of explores, I would say, the burden that secret puts on their relationship. And Yasmina being a secret, what does that do to somebody over 4 years? Explores like the relationship between children and parents, and that kind of parental expectation that children of immigrants very specifically face living in modern Britain today. It explores race like very openly, very honestly, I hope, and authentically. I really hope authentically, and friendships as well. Like I really wanted to explore friendships and the burden that one can unknowingly place onto their friendships by just kind of being who they are. And also
the influence. That's, I think, somebody talked about that. It was the Times UK art review that talked about sort of where are the male Sally Rooney's, right? Of the young, and they were sort of anointing you in that role. And I love that because it sort of explores this. I mean, the through line is this relationship and sort of wondering, are they going to make it? And will he finally trust his parents and, his family and all of that sort of stuff. And you do want to sort of bonk him over the head a little bit and sort of say, dude, like, just tell your family. And it's not fair to, Yasmina either. But also the friends and the influences. And really at that age, like in your 20s, just having that sort of, where your friendships are sort of like your family, they become your family and they're sort of the ones that you trust and that, you turn to for advice and whose approval means so much, all of that sort of stuff. I feel like that really helped so much in all of that. So yeah, talk a little bit about that because I wanted to know, I guess, is this based at all on, your own experiences? Like what led to, is it like kind of a Romeo and Juliet kind of thing, which is definitely something that, and applied to, sort of with that racial lens, like talk a little bit about how you came up with this idea and why you chose this as the story.
Sure. So I have to say right off the bat, like I do not have a Black girlfriend hidden away in my flat that I haven't introduced to my family, which
it's so funny because I do feel like we are in this. I get asked stuff like that all the time. Like, oh, is this character based on you? Is this like relationship based on your relationship with your husband or ex whatever? And so I apologize for.
No.
I didn't like put you on the spot or anything or to get too personal, but I was curious as to what the impetus was.
Yeah, of course. It's just really funny because I remember when I told my mom about the story, she thought me getting a book deal was how I was going to tell her that I had a Black girlfriend. And I kind of said to her, Mom, that's quite a big thing to do, I think. to get a book deal to confess that to you. Right. So it's just quite funny. But I would say that there were three fundamental things that kind of happened in my life that brought me to this book. And the first one was that I had grown really tired of seeing Muslims represented kind of on page, but more so on screen, I think, in film and TV as like, you're kind of the villain or you're the victim, you're kind of somebody who is being forced into a marriage you don't want to be in and being forced to be the kind of person that your parents want you to be, or you're a terrorist. you know, and either way, it's like horrific. And so I was kind of like, that's just not my experience of being a Muslim. Like it's interesting and it's nuanced and it's complex, but it's not those two things. There's so much more to it. So I wanted to write a story about young Muslims in which it wasn't directly an exploration of being Muslim in today's world. It just kind of was that they were Muslim.
Right.
And this was how they were going about their lives. Secondly, I wanted to write about an interracial relationship where it wasn't just a white person plus a non-white person.
Right. Absolutely.
Because we've seen that narrative so many times.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah.
All the time. And again, it's not my world. You know, I've seen so many iterations, so many different people fall in love with each other that I wanted to explore that. And I think specifically I was coming off The Big Sick, which is that Kumail Nanjiani film where him and his real life wife, you know, wrote about the story of how they came together. And so I can't be too mad about The Big Sick because it is a true story. But I remember watching it and just thinking, oh my God, I'm so bored. I'm so bored of seeing the same narrative of like a white person falling in love with a non-white person, and the white person represents freedom and independence from their culture and their traditions and their religion. So I really wanted to write an interracial relationship where it was two different non-white people falling in love. The third one is the big one, which is that when I was younger, when I was around 12 or 13, I had this friend of mine in secondary school, and she was Black and really funny, and we got on incredibly well. And I used to walk her to her bus stop after school because she was the kind of person I just kind of wanted to be around like all the time. And used to walk her to a bus stop and we would just sit and talk, and then her bus would come, she'd get on, I'd walk home, which would take me like an extra, I'm going to say half an hour or whatever. And one day I'm walking her home and my mom drives past and I see her license plate. I see the number plate on her car and I think, oh man, she's seen me with a girl. She's going to be so angry because all my life I'd been told we don't date. Like Muslims don't date. We get married, you know, straight away. There's no dating. Sinful. Right. So I walk home very scared, thinking, man, what can I say? And I walk into my house and my mom says to me, like, who was that girl you were hanging out with or like walking with? And I say, she's my friend. I just go for the truth. I say, she's my friend. I walked her to her bus stop. We were just talking about some school stuff. That's it. Like nothing more than that. She kind of takes a beat. She pauses for a second. And then she says, you shouldn't hang out with girls like that. And when I was 12 or 13, I thought she meant girls outside of my family. I thought she meant don't hang out with girls who aren't related to you because people might think something. Someone might see you and think you're dating. Right. It was only years later that I was telling the story to a friend of mine at university that they kind of pointed out, oh, she said that because she was Black. Yeah. And I sort of sat there and it felt like the world had kind of broken under my feet. That sort of realization of like, this very small thing that had happened in my life that I just sort of let happen. But
you didn't even realize it. Have you, I'm curious, have you talked to your mother about this since then?
Yeah. So
with the book, has she read it? What did she say or think or whatever?
So my mom hasn't read the book. She's not a big reader of books. She's very proud and she's very happy about it. But she was very clear. She was like, I'm probably not going to read it. I was like, all right, okay. Just buy a copy. It's
yeah.
But when I had this realization that maybe she was talking about this girl being Black, I raised it with her and she just didn't remember it because it happened so long ago. It happened six years ago. She had no recollection of the sort of moment. And I kind of prodded her a little bit, interrogated her a little bit. I was like, would you have said something like that? Meaning she was a Black girl. And she was like, no, I wouldn't. I would never have done that. But it's kind of one of the moments where I was like, I don't know what to believe because actually I was walking around with girls from school that weren't related to me. And if my mom had never said anything about those girls who were Pakistani Muslim like myself. Yeah. So it did become a little bit of like and it stuck in my brain and it kind of opened this, it opened this door where I realized, once I realized that, I started seeing all the other manifestations of anti-Blackness in South Asian communities, whether it was in films or TV shows or it was people in my community, my friends or my family, I just started seeing it everywhere. And I was like, oh my God, and it stuck in my head when I was sort of 18 or 19, it just stuck in my head. And I thought, I really want to write about this, but I thought I could only write about it in a very sort of academic nonfiction way, like a real sturdy text which explores like colonialism and imperialism and the British Empire and all that kind of very big, heavy stuff. And I thought, I'm not smart enough for that. So I never wrote that book. And so then in 2019, I watched The Big Sick, and that triggered this massive thing in me where I was like, I'm going to write my own interracial romance. I'm going to write about Muslims, and I'm going to write about anti-Blackness in the South Asian community. And that is where this book came from. So
can I just say, I mean, I already wrote you about this, and for those of you who are listening, I told Kasim this before we started, but after I read this and I put it down, I had this massive like reaction that I sort of had to free write while my husband was driving us like on I-95 in the East Coast of the United States, driving our kids somewhere. And he was like, what are you so furiously writing about? And I was like, I need to like let out all of my thoughts about this book. And I emailed you a little bit about it right afterwards. But one of the things, my first boyfriend was Black, and this was in the 80s. Yeah, this was in the 80s. So that was a long time ago in the Baltimore area. And this was actually in school, in a performing arts school. And so my parents didn't necessarily see it, but I remember like thinking, this is and I wasn't a writer back then. I didn't start writing until, until about a decade ago. But I remember thinking like, this is the kind of thing that would just absolutely, like my family would fall apart. I'm an only child, and I can absolutely see my parents disowning, because there is so much racism in the Southeast Asian community, especially like, Steph Cha's book, Your House Will Pay, explore this a little bit also. And I think that this is what your book does so well, is just sort of not only put the blame on the parents, on the older generation, but also explore how that seeps into sort of the generation of the people who are supposed to sort of be younger and know better and all of that sort of stuff, like how it just sort of, and also not only your relationships romantically, but also your friendships as well, and all of that sort of stuff. And it's very unflinching about it and really honest in a way that I found so riveting and really, and just courageous. So hats off on that, because I really felt like it was not easy, and it was not what we want to read necessarily, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean? Like you want to read this like rousing, like, yes, let's vanquish, there's no more racism and blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot of complexity in these, in the various communities and how we treat each other. And I thought it was so honest about that. So I just, and sort of the hierarchy of the various colors and, and how dark you are and all of that sort of stuff. So I just thought that was really interesting and something that needs to be told.
God, thank you. Thank you so much for saying all of that. I know exactly what you mean about it not being the kind of book that people might want to read, because when I kind of went home, because I live in London, my family's in Birmingham. I went home after the book deal happened, and a family member was like, "Oh, your book deal." And I was like, "Oh yeah, thank you." And then they said, "Why did you write it?" And I thought they meant the question kind of how you've asked it, which is like interested to know. So I was like giving them this whole story about modern Muslims and anti-Blackness and racism and blah, 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 blah. And then they were like, no. Why did you choose to write this story? Why did you choose to paint us as racists?
Yeah.
And that kind of floored me, because I thought to myself, but I'm not painting us as racists. I'm kind of opening this conversation that people do not want to have. and I'm asking the question about anti-Blackness in the South Asian community, but I'm also kind of asking loads of other questions, and where the idea has come from, and what is our responsibility as parents and as children. And none of that seemed to be what he was interested in talking about. He just was like quite annoyed that I'd chosen to write something like this. And I think one of the things that he said was, so now, you know, you're kind of forgiving white people for being racist, and now you're blaming us instead. And I was like, oh my God, no. That's not what I'm doing.
Right?
But it was quite a hard conversation to have, because it really hurt me, you know. Kind of, I was like sitting there thinking, my God, you haven't even read the book, like, but also, you know, God, this is just a bit sad, because I thought I wrote this for us, and kind of did send me into a little bit of an existential spiral, but I got myself out of it, and I said, no, I believe in this book, and so do so many other people, so I'm going to keep with it. But that was kind of a fear of mine when I was writing it.
Absolutely.
Because I know what it feels. I know as a Muslim, when I talk to other Muslims about anti-Blackness in sort of South Asian and Middle Eastern communities, they will often say, but Islam is not racist. And I say, yes, the religion itself is not racist, but we are, you know, and we need to talk about it. We need to have those conversations. Why is it that an idea of a Muslim is a South Asian man or a Middle Eastern man? Why is it never a Black man? And I just get so much pushback when I've had those conversations with other Muslims and with other people in the South Asian community. So it is a really difficult conversation, and I was scared about that kind of backlash and how are people going to react to it. But thankfully, so far, people are relating to it, and it's resonating with people, which is
absolutely. And I totally understand what you mean, though, because I felt the same way about. I talked about a little bit about sort of, you know, in my book, sort of in the Korean community, both Korean American and also just Korean, you know, the misogyny, as well as, you know, the racism against Blacks, like, you know, against Obama as, you know, as a president and all of that sort of stuff. And people were like, do you think that maybe you should take that out for the Korean edition, because they're not going to be happy about that? And I was like, my book is my book. Like, you know, it is what it is. And if they don't like it, then I guess they don't. But what can I do about that? I mean, you know, like you're not writing to sort of like make it be popular with a particular segment of people, like you, and that's what makes it endure, and that's what makes it resonate with people, is that it addresses those hard questions, right? And says the hard things, even though they are hard.
And isn't it so interesting? I was just having this conversation with a friend the other day about representation and what that conversation is like. And I find that quite often, actually, when people are asking for representation within literature, they're asking for the most positive iteration of that representation.
Right.
And I've seen a few people on Instagram talk about this book and about good intentions, and they've said stuff about, you know, how the Muslims in my book are not very good Muslims, essentially. Like, they don't pray 5 times a day, they don't read the Quran, but they still believe in Islam, and they still believe in God, and they still say they are Muslim. And that's kind of been my reality, and that was the reality that I wanted to portray, was of not being that kind of rigid, strict Muslim, but finding a place for yourself within Islam, which, you know, shifts and adjusts and changes as you grow and you change and you shift. But quite a few Muslims were quite annoyed by that. And I read a few comments where people were talking about why did the author have to depict modern Muslims like this? Why couldn't there have been Muslims who, you know, do follow the religion? And I just thought, but, you know, that is just one story, and there's space.
Exactly. Yeah. I think there is this thing that when you write a story that, you know, is that involves a particular segment that is not, you know, it's not white men, which is, you know, sort of like where, you know, white men are in like all the stories, you know, that they sort of get excited. So the readers get excited from that community, get excited and sort of like want to see themselves represented. And obviously that's kind of its own issue, because then they're expecting this sort of this very homogeneous kind of cohesion, within that community, which doesn't exist in real life. And they should know that better than anyone. And yet they've somehow forgotten because they are a minority also.
Yeah, and there's also, it's so fascinating because there is also that conversation of like, especially with Muslims, there's a conversation around you should represent Muslims as like good, perfect people because there is so much negative representation of them.
Right.
And so they should be portrayed as like completely perfect.
Right. It's your obligation. It's your responsibility because you were able to get this book deal. So therefore you should use this opportunity to uplift the community, not the opposite. Right.
Yeah. And I think that's what my family member was also coming at it from, where I think he was saying, you've got this big book deal and you should be portraying South Asian people as really good people because we don't often get to see that. But I just was like, I'm not interested in portraying a perfect kind of person. I've always found that when I'm reading books or watching TV or film, or the kind of content that I love is the one where the characters are like flawed and complicated and they make bad decisions and they're kind of horrible people.
Absolutely.
And you can really get behind them because you understand them. And I just had no interest in creating the kind of perfect, the Mary Sue of Muslims, if you will. Like,
right. Yeah, exactly.
Not for me.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to move a little bit to craft a little bit, just because this is one of the other things that I told you that I really wanted to talk to you about, even before I knew that we were doing this event. Is this whole idea of sort of the structure. So what I loved was that you're using this really cool structure where you're looking at sort of the important moments in this couple's, in the life of the romance, and their relationship, and sort of, being very innovative, I think, not just telling it linearly. And I love that. And I just thought, and I just wondered how you came up with that and whether that's how you wrote it or whether you sort of like wrote, their whole relationship and then sort of picked those moments like after you wrote it and then sort of sculpted it around that.
So I don't plan when I write. Which
same.
Kind of,
me too. I'm in a very, very bad position right now with my second novel because of that. I totally understand. Yes.
I just find it constricts me. I find that, so I like to just write as it were. And so I'm almost like a reader discovering the book as I write. So there will be moments where something happens. For example, one of the characters, Imran, is a gay Muslim. And when I wrote him, I never thought he would be, and then suddenly he was, and that's just what happened. And then his story kind of grew out of this like split-second decision to just make him a gay Muslim. Right. So when I was writing it, basically what happened was,
did it feel like a decision though, or more like a revelation? I feel like a lot of times it feels like a revelation. No.
Yeah, like they already exist and you're kind of just like,
right, you're just like realizing it for the first time and you're like, oh well, of course. Yeah.
yeah Fascinating. It does feel more like a realization. I remember messaging my friends in another book. I was sending part of my second book to my friend chapter by chapter, and she would read something and she'd be like, I can't believe this happened. And I'm like, oh my god, I know, right? What's going to happen next? And she'd be like, you're the writer.
Hello, exactly. No, I do the same thing. Yeah, no, I do that too. I love that.
But when I was writing Good Intentions, when I sat down to write it, all I thought was, I want to start with the moment that Noor tells his parents, because that's like an exciting part. That's just, I see exactly the book beginning at that point.
Exactly.
And then when I finished writing that chapter, I thought, well, now I want to go back. Now I want to go back in time and I want to see when they met. Like, this is them at this point, but now I want to go back and I want to see Noor and Yasmina coming together. So I wrote that chapter. And then it just kind of was like, okay, now let's go back here. And now let's go here. And now let's go here. And it just kind of, the timeline fragmented in a way that kind of felt to me, it kind of felt like what I wanted to read next. So I was
Yeah.
writing the parts that I just wanted next. And I did think, you know, when we sent this out to publishers, I did have a conversation with my agent and I said, look, I never planned for the timeline to be like this. I never structured it like this. There are no post-it notes on my wall with red lines pointing to each other. There's none of that. So if a publisher does come and say, let's look at the timeline, I'm open to that. But what I'm not open to is it just being a chronological story. Because I thought, my God, how boring would that be, actually? Because if you just
and also the other thing that I loved about this timeline is that and the way that you describe it is how I write too, is, you know, you write something and then you sort of, even if it means going back in time and doing a very long flashback or whatever, that, you know, just sort of thematically, like something happens in the present, in the sort of through line of the present. And then, you know, which is clearly there in your story, because, you know, you start with telling the parents and then like what happens as a result of that. So you are sort of following that, but then at the same time, various things happen that make you go, wait, why is that happening? Or why is he saying that? Or why is she doing that? And then just as I'm thinking that, like, and I'm wondering why that's happening, then, you know, there's a scene break or a chapter break, and then all of a sudden you go back and you explain that to us. So I just thought, like, I felt like very much in sync with you as a reader, you know, with the writer, sort of like my interests and my questions that I was asking were being answered by you in the same way that, like, I'm sure it was occurring to you when you were writing it. So I think that's what happens when you have a very cool, like, symbiotic relationship between, like, the reader and the author. And that's what you hope for, right? Is for, like, the readers that are your sort of ideal readers to have that experience with the text the same way that you had when you were writing it. And I love that. And I think that's what fascinated me, was that just when I was thinking, like, oh, well, that raises this question, then all of a sudden, and it didn't matter when it happened, but you answered that with, like, the perfect scene that helped me see why that was happening, you know, in the present. So I loved that. And I wondered whether you engineered it, like, after the fact, you know, like you had written it more or less linearly, sort of thought to yourself, oh, this is kind of boring, and let's sort of restructure it in this way. But no, you didn't. You did it the way that, you know, we see it on the page, which is what makes it so exciting.
Yeah, it really, again, thank you for saying that. I'm so glad that it worked so well with you. I do have to admit here that, like, my editor in the UK, my editor in the US, we did move like 2 chapters just to make them.
Of course, yeah.
So hands up, there was a little bit of structuring, but on the whole, like, we were very happy with the way that it flowed. And I think you're right. I think I was being led less by logic and more by emotion.
Yeah.
So it never felt to me like, oh, logically, we have to go to this next step now. It always felt to me like, where am I emotionally at this moment? And where can I go in their past that will emotionally, like, it's going down the same sort of emotional moment. So when I was reading it back, I was always struck by, like, how easily they flowed into each other. Because I remember the first time I read this back after, you know, after the book deal was done, and I just thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to go and change all the chapters. Like, they probably don't even make any sense. And I read it, and I was struck actually by how easy they were to flow into each other.
They really did. I loved the flow of it. And that's actually one of the reasons why I was so floored by the structures, because it seemed complex to me, and yet so readable and so accessible and so natural and organic. And that's why I think that's one of the first things that I asked you. I was like, I want to do an event with you so that I can ask you all of these questions. Like, I want to ask you how you did it. Okay. So for the people in the audience, if you can feel free to post any questions in the Q&A, and I'll read through them, and I'll ask in about 5-10 minutes or so, but I have so many more. So I'm gonna keep on going for right now. So the other thing that I just loved is sort of this whole thing about the vulnerability of the young male novelists, and are those like are gone in this time? That's the question that was raised by the UK Times review. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, like, because you not only are you an author, but you're also an editor in the UK at Penguin Random House. And so I just wanted to ask, like, what are your thoughts about that? What are you seeing? And like, and also how cool is that they said that and they noticed that? And this particular reviewer, whom I don't know, I just don't know the UK space as well, but and the fact that you sort of are filling that role, which I think is awesome and so cool.
Yeah, it's that Sunday Times review is really something. It's kind of, I just haven't gotten over it yet.
Yeah.
It's actually framed behind me right there.
Oh, I love that. That's great.
But yeah, it's really interesting that conversation about young men in publishing, whether it's people who work in publishing or people who are being published, is something that we're kind of having all the time. It seems to be something that really interests a lot of newspapers and media outlets, and so we kind of see an article go up like every so often. What I find fascinating about it is that the articles often come from this perspective of like, is publishing too woke? Is publishing too liberal? Is it too feminine? Whatever that means. And I always feel like that's the wrong approach, because my approach is, who is publishing being advertised to as a legitimate career?
Yeah.
And it's being advertised to, let's be completely honest about it, women, you know? And so writing is being advertised to women as like a career that they can do, whereas men are not seeing that, they're not seeing that for themselves. And so then it becomes a much broader conversation about the way that writing is treated in Britain. I think specifically, I can only talk about Britain because this is where I am. But, you know, writing really isn't taken that seriously here. Yeah. And so if you tell someone you want to be a writer, they often respond with, oh, you know, aside your day job, you know? Yeah. So, for example, when I told people I wanted to be a writer, they were like, well, you'll be a teacher or a lawyer or something. Yeah. And then you can be a writer on the side, right? And that's kind of why it's always been. And I'll be completely honest, like, I have a day job and I continue to have my day job. I'm not earning near enough money as a writer to be able to give that up. And so it then does become a conversation of like, if, you know, we are advertising publishing as a legitimate career to women, then women are getting those jobs. Women are publishing the books they read, which is women.
Well, okay, except that no. I'm going to push back on you on that, because I don't know that it's being pushed as a legitimate career for women, more that it's like a nice hobby. And so since you're a woman and since you don't really need a career as a stay-at-home mom or whatever, like, sure, it's something that you should do. Okay, so that's sort of what I have seen, but I'm, you know, in my own little bubble here. So who knows? Maybe that's naive or whatever.
I think I meant more like jobs in publishing.
Right. Oh, okay.
So that side of it. And so when you have this kind of like, who are books pushed at, who is publishing pushed at?
Oh, totally. Right.
Career.
Right.
I think then you get into this very interesting conversation about, and then what I find really fascinating is my younger brother, he doesn't read. And so when I ask him about books and stuff, he always is like, I don't read. But then the other day he said to me, I really want to start reading again. Do you have any books on cryptocurrency? And I was like, well, no, but I've got a bunch of books on lots of fictional stuff. And he was just so not interested in that. And I also think that a lot of men generally just view reading as like an information.
Right.
Point.
Right.
Like,
Nonfiction for sure. My husband is like a total nonfiction reader. My oldest kid is very much of a, you know, like, I read a ton of stuff, but they're all nonfiction about, you know, like, coding and Dungeons and Dragons and crypto stuff and whatever. Yeah, totally.
And so then isn't that interesting? Because then it becomes about like, so men aren't reading that much fiction. And then if they are reading fiction, it's not, you know, it's quite classics often.
Yeah.
the classics. And so it's so interesting then, isn't it? Because it's like, how do we fix this? How do we go in and try to fix this? And I think the publication of my book is like one teeny tiny step, isn't it? Because it's publishing a different kind of book. It's a male author writing about a vulnerable male protagonist in a space where we haven't seen that in a very long time. So that's one tiny step. And I would hope that leads to more writers writing and being published. But I think publishing needs to have a bigger conversation with itself about, who are we advertising to and how are we advertising ourselves to those people? But part of me, the cynical part of me, thinks it's working, isn't it? Money is being made.
I suppose, but there's obviously more money that could be made if you could sort of get the other slice of the pie, right? Because if you're only getting at half of it. So talk to me a little bit about being an editor versus being an author. I mean, when we first logged in, you were like, this whole being an author thing, it's very, it's overwhelming and whatever. But I expect that you've seen that, right, from the editorial side, because you've seen your authors that you're shepherding through the process, go through things like this. So I'm just curious how it differs from what the same stuff you've already seen, but from the side of the editor, and how this is different, or if it's not.
So I was just talking to someone at my UK book launch, which I should say I was just at my UK book launch, and now I'm doing my US book launch. I was having this conversation about, like, basically what it feels like to me is when you're going through like a big thing in your life, whether that's like going to university or moving home or going through a breakup, there are scripts, there are these kind of narratives that we've seen play out on TV or in books or just through general life. You kind of know how you're supposed to be feeling, like you kind of know. And I think sometimes the struggle comes from, I'm not feeling how I'm supposed to be feeling. Why is that? Publishing a book is not at all a narrative that I have access to. And so even though I'm an editor and I sit on this side of stuff and I say to my authors, it's okay if you're feeling excited, but also really scared, like that's just completely normal. Don't worry about it. Every author goes through it. I'm not going through something similar and I'm saying those things to myself, but it doesn't help. It does not help, because actually I am feeling excited and I am feeling scared, but I'm also kind of feeling a little bit like I'm on the edge of, like, I don't know, like a dark hole in which I can't see anything, and like just teetering over that edge. And there's just no narrative for that. There's no script for that to follow, because I think the biggest thing that I'm finding hard to deal with is the uncertainty of it all. Because there is a hard certainty to rejection, which is nothing is going to happen. Your life is not going to change at all. You've been rejected. The only thing that can happen is either you keep writing or you give up. That's it. Nothing else. But once you get accepted, once you get that book deal, everything is on the table and everything is also off the table. And that's quite hard to deal with. And it's been really interesting going through this process as somebody who does the other side of this as my job, because it's given me a real insight into what it's like to be an author. And I hope I'm more sympathetic now. Like I'm, talking to my authors a lot more than I did before. And it's so interesting because I think before I would have said, I do take care of my authors. I'm very comforting and I'm very sympathetic to them, but actually I was to a point, and now I feel much more aligned with them. So that's been really nice for my career. And actually what I found is, for a while, I wasn't telling my authors I had a book because I thought, they're the talent. It's their spotlight. Let's not steal it. But when I tell them about it, they get so happy because they say, you understand. Oh my God, you understand. And it makes them feel...
Exactly. And also it's so funny that you say that, because I've had two editors and both of them are, authors in their own right. But my first author, Sarah Crichton at FSG, she was like a ghostwriter and she was like a co-author of like nonfiction books and whatever. And she'd done some essays and things, but she wasn't like a novelist. of her own work, whereas the editor, my US editor now, is David Ebershoff, who at Penguin Random House at in the US. And he is, he's a huge author in his own right, and he has his own book coming out, and I keep on asking him about like his book, like, when is your book coming out? What's going on with your book and whatever, whenever we talk. And he's like, don't worry about me. Like, let's talk about your book and whatever. And he wants to talk about his authors and, and he's just like, my book is like, whatever. And I'm just sort of like, no. I want to know, because that's one of the things that I think is wonderful, is that you want to know that your editor really like understands what you're going through, that when you are freaking out and being like a complete idiot and everything else, that they're like, yes, I know exactly what you're feeling. It's okay that you're freaking out, because I freak out too. You know what I mean? Like, that's seriously like one of the things that I was really excited about, that I was like, finally, like somebody who will, like be like, oh yeah, you're crazy, but no more crazy than anybody than me,
Yeah, absolutely. Like I remember when I was mentoring an author on the Penguin Random House scheme that we've got here over in the UK. I told her just upfront, I was like, look, you followed me on Twitter, you're gonna see that I have a book. So I'm gonna be honest with you that, yeah, I do have a book coming out. And I was doing it to be very professional. And she found that so soothing. She said, oh God, then you know what it feels like to be rejected. And you know what it feels like to have an opportunity come your way. And just thank you for telling me. And we spoke really openly and really candidly about the rejection process and what it feels like to get accepted onto something like that program, because I felt the same way when I got my literary agent and then the book deal. And it helped so much with conversations. It helped so much because she fully, I think, in telling her that I was essentially what she wanted to become, and because I was what she wanted to become, I had been where she was.
Right.
She just opened up to me in a way that I don't think she would have before, and it made mentoring her really like just such a nice thing, and it made editing the book such a nice experience. And I really hope she goes on to sell that book for like a lot of money. It's a very good book.
That's so great.
But yeah, it makes things a lot easier. And sometimes I do feel like when some of my authors, like when we're messaging each other, like emailing each other, sorry, they'll say, how's your book going? And I do feel a bit like, oh, I would really, no, you're the talent, you're like the person.
Right. Yeah.
And I remind myself that they're asking because they almost kind of want to be reminded of the fact that I know.
Absolutely. And also like this is for me. I mean, so maybe not every author feels this way, but for me, when I'm talking to, my editor, I sort of almost like divide him in half, sort of like there's the editor part of you where I want to like, tell you about like what's going on with my work and get your advice and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But then like, there's the sort of friend / author, another author, like fellow author. And like, I really think that fellow author part is a huge advantage and gives you like a competitive advantage in a way of being an editor, like, as an editor. So I would say from my perspective, embrace that, because if I were one of your authors that's being edited by you, I would be like very, very, happy about that. And speaking of which, so what about has the process of, being edited by somebody else for your book, has that changed the way that you edit in any way? Your authors?
Yes. My editor in the UK and my editor in the US are both so incredible at editing that they've taught me so much about being a better editor. And I'm so grateful for it, because in being edited, I've become a better editor, and I know how to. It's also taught me how to talk about edits, because I think, I'm relatively young, like I'm 27. I haven't been in publishing for a long time. Right. So I there's a long way for me to go to learn about editing other books, but it's taught me how to talk about edits to an author as well. Like, I think that's a really big part of it. And I just feel I was just saying to I was on a podcast with someone and I was saying that essentially I think every editor should have to like go through editing a book, because I think it will teach them so much about the editing process that they didn't know before. I truly think that. But it will also teach them what it's like to be edited. And I think that makes you a much better editor, because you understand what it's like to be on the receiving end of comments that you're making.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to like, romanticize writing so much, but you do write it in like solitude, and it's just you, and then suddenly it's going out to somebody and you're having to face like, oh, that sentence doesn't work, or that plot line doesn't work, or this character doesn't work. And I think knowing what that feels like just makes you a better editor.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a question from Coco, which actually touches on this. Oh, you're like, yay, Coco. Okay. Love listening to you, Angie and Kasim, sorry. I don't know why I keep on wanting to place that accent.
Okay.
Congrats on your US launch. Can you tell us a little bit about how it feels writing your second book? How has it been? Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about your second book. So this is a great segue to please tell us about your second book, first of all, and how does it feel writing your second book? How has it, and back to Coco's question, how has it been different to writing your first? And do you feel having an invested readership, myself included, now makes the writing process easier or harder?
God, Coco, thank you so much for that question, for multiple questions. So I'm going to confess something here, which is that I wrote the first draft of my second book before the first book sold.
I hate you so much. I am so jealous of that. I am so jealous. I didn't even start my manuscript for my second book until after the paper book launch of my first book, which was crazy and stupid. And I do not recommend this to anyone. Okay. Tell me just, and then I need to drink while you're talking about this. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. But, essentially what happened was I wrote the first book. I sent it out to a literary agent, and then we were discussing where to send it out. And what happened was I went through this massive friendship breakup, which kind of blew my life to smithereens, if we're being completely honest.
I'm so sorry. I hate friendship breakups so much.
Aren't they the worst? And nobody talks about them.
They really are the worst. They really, really are. No, I hate friendship. Oh, it's awful.
Really messes with your head, and I just wrote this book out of that emotional mess of my life. And I remember telling my agent about it, and she was like, never have I ever had an author or heard of an author writing their second book before we've even sold the first
Seriously, I really do not like you. I'm so glad that you didn't tell me this before, like, we did this event. Otherwise I would have been seething the entire time.
Yeah, it's very funny, but I'm so glad that I did, because I found editing the first book and putting everything together for it, and being on promotion now, doing publicity and all kinds of stuff, like, quite hard. And I found it hard to think about writing the second book. So, it's written. I do need to edit it. Like, my agent has read it. And
sure, of course.
So there is editing needing to be done. But I'm so glad that I did it, because also I wrote it without any expectation of Kasim Ali, the author.
Yes. Yeah.
So I never thought, because I didn't think that we were even going to sell the first book, I never thought, what will people who read Good Intentions expect from me? I just kind of wrote the book that was in me at the time. And I'm so glad that I did, because I think I wrote a really authentic second book. And now I'm looking back at it and I'm really glad. Like, it's a lot stronger than I thought it was. Like, I thought it would be really bad, but actually I'm like so happy with it. And again, it's like, so what is it about? It's about a friendship breakup. And it's about these two people, a boy and a girl, who they meet when they're 11 and they begin this friendship together. And 10 years later, it kind of ends in this kind of big, but also kind of small ending. There's a fight, but then it also ends with a kind of a whimper where they sort of both realize that, like, their friendship was never supposed to last. And here's the thing, it's not a spoiler, because it starts with the ending of the friendship. So very much like Good Intentions. I'm doing the linear timeline thing again, the non-linear timeline thing again. And I really just wanted to explore, like, a really codependent, toxic friendship between a boy and a girl, and what does that feel like, and who are you in your friendship, and sort of that really interesting idea about the friends that we make when we're so young, and we keep them with us for you know, throughout our lives, and who are we when we're outside of those people, and who are we when we're with those people, and you know, should we hang on to a friendship just because we've been friends with someone for so long? So
absolutely. And I think about this a lot. I think this will resonate with a lot of people, because I do think about this a lot. Like, not only I think those types of thoughts for the friendships that I keep, but then like I think that about the friendships that I don't keep, where, you know, they were like the most important thing in your life at one point in your life, at a very volatile point in your life where everything mattered so much. And then now, like, if you don't keep that friendship and it does peter out and there's no like huge fight or whatever, it just didn't last, then yeah, you do think back, or at least I do. And I think, you know, what happened to that? Like, here was this person who was so important to me. Like, how is it possible that we're not at all important to each other, when there was a time when I thought about them and their words, like, and their every facial expression mattered so much to me, you know?
And then also the idea that there is a person walking out in this world who only knows you up until a certain point. So they have this idea of you, whether or not the friendship, whether or not the friendship exploded at the end, or it just sort of disappeared gradually over time, but they have this idea of you as a person that ends when that friendship ends, and they will never know who you become, and you will never know who they become. And I find that, you know, I had this friendship breakup in January 2020, so over 2 years ago now, and sometimes I still think about it, and I still think about, I have no idea what kind of person that person became. I don't know where they went. I don't know what they've done. And similarly, they have no idea about me. And it is really sad. It's really upsetting, because you think we put so much into this friendship and we invested so much into each other.
Right. And there's this romanticized view that says that, like, oh, when you're like 60 or 70, you'll like somehow come together and you'll, you know, but like, you know, but that probably won't happen. That probably doesn't happen in like 95% of the cases or whatever. So it's really interesting.
I have no dreams. I have no hope, I think, of like ever having that friendship back, because I also understand that it's not a good one. I also understand that it's not a good friendship to be in. But
it sounds so awesome, and I can't wait to read it already.
Oh my God, Angie, the second we can send you a manuscript, I absolutely am.
I mean, except that I won't, because I'll be like, oh my God, he published his first book 2 years after mine, and he already has his second book, and I don't at all. I like, what is wrong with me? Okay, now I'm gonna go and quietly freak out for the rest of the night.
Nothing is wrong with you. I think the question is, what is wrong with me? Why did I do that? But
no, I think it's like perfect. As soon as I hand in the first shitty draft of this, not the second novel, this like awful novel of mine, I am definitely going to work on the first, like, I already have the first draft of the first chapter of my third book already done. Like, that's because I was like, I'm never doing this again, where I am just like hanging all of my hopes and dreams onto this one thing, and like not writing for 3 years, which is what I did, which is ridiculous, except for like essays and stuff, you know.
It is hard though. It is hard. I would say, you know, since, you know, I wrote book 2 and then we sold book 1, and I haven't written anything since then. So I do really understand it. It is really difficult to put yourself in that space. But I should say I have started book 3. So
oh, hate you.
I'm sorry.
The second, okay, so I'm just looking at the Q&A again. I think it was just not just, but Rose, who was saying thank you very much, and who I think
thank you to Coco Mellors, who is an incredible author in her own right. And Angie, I implore you to go read Cleopatra and Frankenstein.
Oh, okay. I will.
It's published by Bloomsbury, I think, in the US, but she's a fellow Fourth Estate author here in the UK. She's her book is fascinating. I loved it so much, Coco. I really did.
Well, talking about books everybody should buy, we got a link for Good Intentions in the chat, and you should go and buy that right now.
Absolutely.
But thank you both so much. This has been such a pleasure to just sit and listen and soak it all in.
Thank you for having us
so much, Atticus. Thank you to Literati and for hosting us. And cheers again, and congratulations to Kasim. And thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to everybody who came tonight. Feel free to watch any of the other videos for At Home with Literati, and then this one when it comes out in a couple days. Go start sharing it around. Alrighty. Well, everybody, thank you so much, and have a good night.
Thank you. Congratulations again.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you. Bye-bye.